I should have known better than to wear beige, the color of retreat, of blending into the walls. I stood among the glittering crowd at my sister's wedding reception, feeling like a smudged fingerprint on a champagne flute. Unnoticed, uncelebrated, unclaimed. The ballroom was everything Madeline had ever dreamed of. Crystalline chandeliers throwing diamonds across polished marble. Violinists tucked into corners playing songs no one really listened to. Towering floral arrangements so dense you could lose yourself between the roses. And somewhere, lost inside it all, was me. Claire. The sister who gave up everything so Madeline could have a night like this. My dress was plain, bought on clearance. The sleeves itched. I kept tugging at the hemline, as if modesty could somehow shield me from the invisible knives already beginning to fly. I watched her, my sister, twirl among the guests, her gown a frothy masterpiece of silk and glitter, her laughter floating, above the crowd like a bubble that would never pop. Madeline had always known how to command a room. I'd once found it enchanting. Tonight, it felt like standing outside a locked door, pressing my forehead to the cold wood. I fingered the thin silver chain around my neck, my mother's locket, the one thing I had left that hadn't been touched by Madeline's new gleaming world. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," a voice called out, pulling me from my thoughts. Madeline stood on the dais, glass in hand, cheeks flushed pink with wine and triumph. Nathan, her groom, stood at her side, a polite smile fixed to his face like it had been stitched there. The crowd hushed, their collective anticipation like static crackling against my skin. Madeline's eyes swept the room and landed on me. Felt it, a cold premonition slicing through the warm glow of the chandelier light. "I just want to say," Madeline began, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "how grateful I am for all the people who made today possible. My amazing friends, my wonderful in-laws, and of course, my sister, Claire. A spotlight. A noose." I blinked into the sudden sharp brightness of her words. "I mean, honestly?" She giggled, tossing her hair back. "If it weren't for Claire setting the bar so low with her life choices, I might never have pushed myself so hard." Laughter rippled through the room, thin, nervous, eager to align with the bride. My ears roared, my throat closed. "She really showed me what not to do," Madeline continued, eyes gleaming. "I mean, who needs a career, or a fiancé, or even a plan, right? Just keep dreaming, Claire. Maybe someday you'll be the bridesmaid instead of whatever you are now." Another wave of polite chuckles. Champagne flutes clinked. I stood there, nailed in place, my smile frozen and grotesque. The blood drained from my fingers. I clutched the locket at my neck so hard it bit into my skin, and then by accident or fate I caught Nathan's eye. His face, so carefully composed moments before, had fractured. There was no polite amusement there, no loyalty to the woman, on his arm. There was rage. It flickered across his features like a wildfire barely contained, then buried itself under a strained smile as Madeline pressed herself against him and lifted her glass high. "To family," she chirped, oblivious. The room toasted, glasses raised, glittering approval. I turned blindly, slipping between groups of laughing guests, my feet finding the double doors that led out into the night air. The garden was cool and silent, a balm against the inferno burning inside me. I stumbled down the stone steps, heels clacking, vision blurred. Somewhere behind me, music swelled. Another toast, another cheer. I pressed my back against a marble column and slid down until I was crouched there like a wounded animal, gasping quietly so no one would hear. I unlatched the locket, staring down at the tiny photo inside. My mother, smiling in a way I barely remembered. "You would have known," I whispered into the dark. "You would have seen what she became." The garden smelled of overwatered roses and distant salt from the bay. Somewhere overhead, the stars blinked, cold and impassive. For a long, long moment, I sat there, humiliated, discarded, invisible, letting the truth settle like ash across my skin. Madeline didn't just forget me. She despised me, and everyone else, everyone who laughed, thought I deserved it. I could have stayed there all night, vanishing inch by inch into the stone. But deep in my bones, something stirred. A memory, a promise, a stubborn spark. I wasn't nothing. Not yet. Not forever. Stood slowly, brushing dirt and petals from my dress, the locket swinging heavily against my chest. From the shadows near the entrance, a figure lingered. Nathan. Watching. Waiting. His face unreadable, hands curled into fists at his sides. Our eyes met, two silent witnesses to the same crime. And though no words passed between us, I knew. He saw everything, and he hadn't laughed. There's a picture of us somewhere, tucked away in the bottom of a shoebox I left behind. Me, maybe 14. Madeline, barely 5, standing in front of me, her little hands wrapped tight around the hem of my sweater. Mom must have taken it, back when she still remembered birthdays and Tuesday dinners and kissing scraped knees. Before the hospital visits, before the cancer. I remember how Madeline's hair smelled that day. Strawberries and dust. I remember thinking, I'll keep her safe. Always. When Mom died, Dad did the best he could for a while. But grief hollowed him out, left him clinging to overtime shifts and bourbon glasses. So it was me who packed Madeline's lunches, me who braided her hair before school, me who sat in the cold bleachers during her first dance recital, clapping, until my hands ached. College acceptance letters came and went. I tucked them into drawers, telling myself there would be time later. Madeline needed me now. Dreams could wait. At first, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like love. Madeline grew up beautiful, blindingly so. Where I was plain and bookish, she sparkled like cut crystal. People always said we looked nothing alike, and the more they said it, the more Madeline leaned into the difference. Hair straightened to gleaming perfection. Laughter sharpened to a blade that could slice through any room. I was proud of her. I really was. But somewhere between high school dances and college applications, something shifted. Madeline stopped introducing me as her sister. I became Claire, who helped raise me, said with an embarrassed laugh, like explaining away a secondhand dress. Her friends started making little jokes about my thrift store clothes, my 2-bedroom apartment, my lack of real ambition. Madeline never corrected them. At family gatherings, she'd pat my arm when I said something sweet or quaint, as if I were some well-meaning relic, too soft for the world she was conquering, and I let her. I smiled and shrugged and made excuses. She's young. She doesn't mean it. I told myself loyalty meant forgiveness, even when forgiveness tasted like pennies in my mouth. I met Aaron at 26, a civil engineer, steady, kind, with calloused hands and a slow smile. We talked about shared dreams, a tiny house with a creaky porch, a Labrador retriever, Sunday mornings spent reading in bed. For a moment, it felt like life was catching up to me, offering me something just for myself. Madeline hated him from the start. He's boring, she complained, twirling a glass of wine at Thanksgiving. Claire, you could do so much better. Better, of course, meaning richer. Shinier. Something that would reflect better on her. When Aaron left me, 2 weeks after putting a ring on my finger, his words felt rehearsed, fed to him in the dark. I can't deal with all this. Baggage, he said, meaning Madeline, meaning Dad, meaning my patched-up life stitched together with duty and small, stubborn hopes. The day I returned the ring, a simple gold band that now felt heavier than a tombstone. Madeline laughed. Not cruelly, not intentionally, just lightly, dismissively, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. The years that followed blurred together, long stretches of work and quiet, punctuated by phone calls I always answered, even when I knew better. Claire, can you help me move? Claire, I need a loan. Just a little. Claire, can you babysit while I have this networking thing? Each time, I said yes. Each time, I convinced myself it mattered. Because if I stopped saying yes, what did that make me? Someone who gave up? Someone who abandoned family? I wore my loyalty like armor, not realizing it was weighing me down, drowning me inch by inch. Now, standing under the dripping garden trellis, the echoes of Madeline's speech still ringing in my ears, it hit me with bruising clarity. Madeline hadn't needed me in years. She hadn't loved me in years. She had simply used me as a rung in her ladder, stepping higher with every apology I swallowed, every dream I shelved. I touched the locket at my throat, the last thing Mom ever gave me, and wondered bitterly what she would think of the woman I had become. A footnote at her own sister's wedding, a punchline in a sequined ballroom. The grief bloomed inside me, not the raw, screaming kind, but the slow, strangling kind. The grief for something you never really had, even though you spent your whole life clinging to it. Somewhere deep inside, a crack formed. Not a break, not yet, but the first tremor of something inevitable. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was just tired. Tired of holding up a mirror to someone who never once thought to hold one up for me. And in that exhaustion, the first fragile, glittering thread of freedom began to weave itself through my ribs. Madeline had made her choice long ago. Maybe it was time I finally made mine. The garden smelled of roses and rot. I sat on the stone bench by the fountain, twisting, my mother's locket between trembling fingers, the chain cutting faint red lines into my skin. Behind me, inside the ballroom, the party roared on, a living, glittering thing that would have devoured me if I'd stayed a moment longer. Laughter spilled out onto the terrace, high, bright, careless. I wanted to press my palms over my ears like a child, but instead I sat there, still as a statue, the air cold against my damp skin. The first group stumbled out. 3 women and 2 men, drunk on champagne and cruelty. They didn't notice me tucked in the shadows, or maybe they didn't care. "Oh my God, did you see Claire's dress?" One of the women tittered. "It looks like she borrowed it from a librarian in 1985. "At least she's consistent," another chimed in. "Poor, invisible, and absolutely allergic to makeup." More laughter, another glass clinking against another. "Madeline's a saint for even inviting her," someone else said. I would have been too embarrassed. The words hit harder than any slap could have. Not because they were clever, but because they were rehearsed, practiced, shared so easily, so often, that it was practically a toast of its own. A few feet away, pressed against the trellis wrapped. In fairy lights, Madeline leaned into her circle of admirers, face flushed, lips parted in a wicked grin. "Honestly," she said, loud enough for the night to carry it to me, "if Claire were any more pathetic, we'd have to start a charity drive. Maybe get her a date with someone who's blind and desperate." The others shrieked with laughter. I closed my eyes, the sting burning hot behind my lids. My fists clenched so tightly that the delicate chain of my locket snapped, the tiny pendant falling into my lap like a fallen star. Didn't cry. Not yet. I was past tears. Past anger. I was something harder now. Something quieter. Something cold. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen inside the shell of myself, watching the party eat itself alive. Eventually, the laughter thinned. Footsteps scattered. The fairy lights buzzed overhead. And that's when I saw her, Madeline, my sister, my ghost, slipping away from the dance floor, shoes in hand, dress hiked indecently above her knees, giggling like a teenager, trailing. Behind her, one of Nathan's groomsmen, Mark, I think his name was, with a hand shamelessly planted on the small of her back. I watched them weave toward the rose trellis, the same place she had laughed about me moments ago, hidden by blooms so thick they swallowed secrets whole. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that it wasn't what it looked like. But then the soft, wet sound of kissing broke the air. I stood up without meaning to, the crushed locket clutched in my palm. Through the gaps in the branches, I saw Madeline, pressed against the stone wall, Mark's hands mapping every curve of her body. Madeline's laughter low and breathy, her arms looping easily around his neck. The silk of her wedding gown hiked up indecently, the train puddling in the dirt. On her wedding night, while Nathan, kind, bewildered Nathan, smiled and toasted and danced inside with their guests, I stumbled back a step, a sharp gasp tearing from my throat. A twig snapped underfoot. Madeline's head jerked up. For a moment, a terrible, crystalline moment, our eyes met through the thorns. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look afraid. She looked bored, as if I were an annoying interruption to her private after-party. Mark said something, low in her ear, and Madeline laughed, dismissing me without a second thought, without even a whispered plea for secrecy. I turned and fled down the path, the night spinning around me, the earth tilting wrong beneath my feet. Back at the fountain, I collapsed, onto the bench, sucking in gulps of cold air that burned my throat. I pressed the broken locket to my chest as if it could anchor me to something real, something that hadn't been poisoned beyond recognition. The lies, the performances, the years. I spent propping her up, excusing her, loving her. For what? So she could wear her betrayal like perfume, like silk, like a crown. I thought of Aaron, the man who had looked at me and seen baggage instead of home. I thought of every whispered joke, every exclusion, every sacrifice I had tied around my own ankles like stones. I had built my life on the belief that love, real love, meant loyalty without question. And now I realized that kind of loyalty was a one-way mirror. It made me invisible even to myself. Madeline had made me invisible. I had let her. The thought was a jagged shard inside me, cutting and cutting until something finally broke free. I looked down at the locket, the photo of my mother smeared with tears I hadn't noticed. Falling. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the stars. Not to Madeline, not to Aaron, not even to myself, to the girl I used to be, the one who deserved better, the one I had abandoned without even realizing it. The fountain beside me burbled, its waters black and endless under the night sky. I imagined dropping the locket into it, letting it sink, letting it take all the years I wasted with it. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I tucked the broken chain into my pocket, stood up on shaking legs, and looked back at the glowing windows of the ballroom. Inside, Madeline twirled in Nathan's arms, her crown slipping, her mask cracking, but still playing queen of a kingdom built on lies. For the first time, I didn't want to be part of it. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to be. Something, ancient and feral, stirred inside me. A creature made of all the years I stayed silent, all the humiliations I swallowed like broken glass. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not tonight. Real revenge, I understood now, wasn't about screaming. It wasn't about lashing out. It was about becoming untouchable. It was about walking away, And one day soon, it would be about making sure Madeline knew exactly what she lost when she chose cruelty over love. I turned away from the ballroom, from the music, from the ruins of everything I thought I knew. The night was cold, but it tasted like freedom. Step by step, I walked into it. I left before sunrise. No goodbye, no forwarding address, no explanations, just one small suitcase, clothes, the broken locket tucked into the front pocket, and a second-hand car that coughed and rattled down the highway like it too was trying to outrun the past. I didn't look back. I didn't trust myself to. The further I drove, the lighter the sky became. First lavender, then gold, then a bright blistering blue that hurt my eyes. By noon, I found myself in a coastal town too small to have a Starbucks, too worn to make it onto any tourist brochure. Town where the ocean was a constant sound, an exhale that never ended, and salt clung to every surface like a second skin. It was perfect. Nobody knew my name here. Nobody would ask me to explain how I had gone from sister of the bride to ghost of myself in a single night. Found a room to rent in an old Victorian house peeling at the edges, an attic space with slanted ceilings, creaky floorboards, and a tiny window that looked out over the endless, breathing sea. There were no mirrors, not one. At first, it unsettled me. Then it became a mercy. Without a reflection, I didn't have to see the damage, didn't have to count the hollowed places where love used to live. Drifted through the first few weeks like a paper boat caught in an undertow. I took a job at the town's used bookstore, a dusty, maze-like place where the smell of old paper and seaweed hung in the air. The owner, Mrs. Abernathy, was in her 70s, wore orthopedic shoes with tiny pink bows, and never asked me more than, "Can you work Thursday too?" I said yes to everything she asked. It was easier than thinking. My days became a soft, colorless rhythm, shelving novels, wiping down the cracked wooden counter, sipping terrible coffee that tasted like burnt wishes. At night, I lay in the attic, room listening to the waves crash against the rocks. Sometimes I held the locket in my hand until I fell asleep, feeling the sharp edge of the broken chain dig into my palm. Sometimes I dreamed of Madeline, always laughing, always out of reach. Other nights, I dreamed of nothing at all, and woke up gasping, as if the nothingness itself was trying to swallow me. One Sunday morning, I found an old canvas and a box of paints abandoned in a corner of the bookstore's stockroom. The colors were dried at the edges, the brushes stiff and matted with dust. Without thinking, I brought them home. The first time I dipped a brush into water, something inside me cracked open, a small, painful rupture. The colors bled onto the canvas in frantic, broken strokes, blue like bruises, red like heartache, yellow like the faint, stubborn pulse of hope. I didn't paint anything recognizable. No landscapes, no portraits, just emotion, raw and clawing its way out of me after years of being buried under politeness and apologies. I cried while I painted, great heaving sobs that made my shoulders shake and the canvas blur. And when I finished, the attic room looked different. Not healed, but alive. I tacked the painting to the slanted wall, where the morning light caught it and made it burn. A new kind of mirror, one I wasn't afraid to look into. The townspeople started recognizing me, not asking questions, just nodding in that small town way that said, "You exist," and that's enough. A woman named Teresa, who ran the bakery, gave me free coffee after my shifts. A retired fisherman named Hank taught me how to patch the soles of my boots. No one asked about my past. No one tried to fix me. Their kindness was like the tide, steady, impersonal, endless. At first, I mistrusted it, tested it for cracks. But slowly, I started letting it in, like warm water seeping under a door I didn't realize had been locked. Laughed once, really laughed, when Teresa burnt a batch of croissants and cursed so colorfully I nearly dropped a stack of poetry books. The sound startled me. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't forced. It was real. A part of me I thought had been buried in the wreckage started clawing its way back toward the surface. I began to journal at night, at first just fragments, broken thoughts. I am tired of being sorry. I want to be seen. I don't owe anyone the pieces of myself anymore. Each sentence felt like building a ladder out of splinters, painful, but necessary. I wrote about the locket, about the night I realized loyalty could become a prison, about the kind of love that asked you to disappear in exchange for a seat at someone else's table. And somewhere between the pages, I found a truth I hadn't been ready to admit before. Madeline hadn't broken me. She had simply exposed the parts of me that had been breaking for a long time. The part that believed love was something you earned by being small enough, silent enough, good enough. The part that thought suffering was proof of worth. And once I saw it, really saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't want to. I wanted something else now. Something bigger. Something that didn't ask me to bleed in order to be worthy of belonging. One evening, standing at the edge of the cliffs, the wind tearing at my sweater and the sea roaring below, I made myself a promise. I would not return to my old life just to be tolerated. I would not step back into the shadows just because it was easier than demanding to be seen. The next time I faced Madeline, if there ever was a next time, it wouldn't be as the invisible sister. It would be as a woman who knew her own worth, who had carved a life out of ruin, who didn't need anyone's permission to exist in full color. The kind of woman who, when asked where she had gone all those months, could simply smile and say, "I found myself," and that would be answer enough. Healing didn't come like a sunrise. It wasn't clean or cinematic. It wasn't a neat montage of laughter and haircuts and sweeping orchestral music. It was slow, messy, ugly, sometimes, like picking gravel from a wound you forgot you had. But it came. One ordinary afternoon, as I was dusting shelves at the bookstore, an older woman browsing the poetry section struck up a conversation. Her name was Eleanor. She wore linen skirts and smelled faintly of sandalwood and orange blossoms. "You have an artist's hands," she said, tilting her head like she was studying me. I laughed awkwardly, brushing hair from my face. "I used to paint." "Used to," she repeated, smiling like she already knew better. Before she left, she pressed a worn business card into my palm. An art gallery on the main street, one I had walked past 100 times without daring to step inside. "You should come by," she said. "Bring something of yours." I almost threw the card away, almost convinced myself it was a fluke, a kindness offered out of pity. But that night, under the crooked light bulb of my attic room, I stood before my makeshift wall of paintings, jagged explosions of color, of pain made tangible, and thought, what if it wasn't pity? What if it was permission? 2 weeks later, Eleanor introduced me to Martha, the gallery owner, a woman with iron gray hair, sharp eyes, and paint-stained fingernails. Martha didn't ask about my resume. She didn't ask where I had trained, or what my artistic vision was. She looked at the paintings I brought, trembling in my hands like confessions, and simply nodded. "I'll give you a corner," she said. "1 month. You can fill it however you like." It felt like someone had offered me a seat at a table I thought I wasn't allowed to approach. The night of my opening, the gallery smelled of turpentine and hope. Wore a simple black dress, one I bought secondhand, the tag still fluttering like a secret. I pinned my mother's locket, newly repaired, to the inside of the neckline, right against my heart. I didn't expect anyone to come. I didn't expect anyone to care. But they came. Small-town locals, strangers, tourists wandering in off the salty streets. They stood in front of my paintings, not laughing, not dismissing, but looking, really looking, as if the chaos of my healing meant something to them too. I stood in the corner, clutching a paper cup of bad white wine, and for the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed of being seen. I was proud of it. A month. Later, Teresa from the bakery brought in a newspaper clipping, a wedding announcement. Nathan and Madeline. Except something was wrong. Madeline's smile, usually so dazzling, was tight, strained. Whispers filtered through the town grapevine. Rumors that Nathan had moved out, that there were complications nobody wanted to name, that the fairy tale had started crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. I told myself I didn't care. And maybe I didn't. Not in the way I used to. But deep down, I knew the truth. I still had the photos. Tucked away in a sealed envelope, hidden at the bottom of my desk drawer. Blurry but unmistakable shots of Madeline and Mark tangled together under the rose trellis. Proof of betrayal. Proof of what had been true all along. Not just for Nathan, but for me. I hadn't taken them to use as a weapon. Not really. I had taken them to remember that I wasn't crazy, that the world didn't tilt just because Madeline said it did. Still, the photos pulsed at the edges of my mind now, like a toothache. One night, after a long walk along the cliffs, I sat in my attic room and spread them across the bed. I stared at them, heart thudding. It would be easy to send them, anonymously, surgically. It would be satisfying. But it would also be small, and I wasn't small anymore. I didn't need to destroy Madeline. She was doing a fine job of that on her own. What I needed, what I wanted, was something else. Not revenge. Liberation. For me. For Nathan. Maybe for anyone else who had been collateral damage. In Madeline's glittering little war. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. An invitation arrived at the bookstore, hand-delivered, no return address, a golden envelope, heavy in my hands. Inside, a formal card, embossed with swirling calligraphy. 1-year anniversary celebration. Madeline and Nathan, the Carlton estate. It would be held at the same venue as the wedding. The same marble floors, the same chandeliers, a perfect gilded cage. For a long time, I simply stared at it. Part of me, the old broken part, wanted to laugh, as if Madeline believed I would still be orbiting her son after everything she had done. But the newer part, of me, the stronger, wilder part, smiled. This wasn't a trap. It was an invitation. Not to grovel, not to be humiliated, to choose, to confront, not with rage or bitterness, but with clarity. To show her that I was no longer the invisible sister. I didn't RSVP. I didn't need to. I would go on my own terms. Not for Madeline. Not even for Nathan. For myself. To lay the last stone on the road I had spent the past year building. Out of ashes and salt. The night before the party, I stood by the sea, the locket warm against my chest. I thought about everything I had lost, everything I had survived, everything I had built with shaking hands and stubborn hope. Madeline could keep her castles of lies. I had something better. I had myself, and for the first time, that was enough. I turned from the cliffs, the salt wind stinging my cheeks, and walked back toward the town glowing faintly in the dark. Steady, simple, mine. Tomorrow, I would walk into the Carlton estate. Not as the sister in the shadows. Not as a ghost, but as a woman who had resurrected herself from the ruins. And when I left, it would not be with regret or revenge clutched in my hands. It would be with peace, with dignity, with the kind of freedom Madeline would never even recognize, let alone destroy. The Carlton estate looked exactly the same, maybe a little older. Maybe the roses drooped a little heavier on their vines. But the marble still gleamed, and the chandeliers still dripped crystal like teardrops no one wanted to claim. I stood at the edge of the gravel drive, the ocean wind tugging at the simple navy dress I wore. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just clean lines, soft fabric, and my mother's locket pinned proudly against my heart. I took a deep breath and walked forward. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with champagne laughter and clinking glasses. A quartet played something lilting and forgettable. The crowd shimmered in gold and silver dresses, black tuxedos, diamonds catching the light like small suns. For a moment, the enormity of it pressed against my ribs. All these people, all this noise. But then I felt the locket against my skin and remembered. I wasn't here for them. I was here for me. The moment I stepped into the room, a hush fell like a stone dropped into still water. Heads turned, mouths parted. Someone at the back whispered, "Is that Claire?" Madeline, radiant in a beaded champagne gown, froze mid-laugh when she saw me. For a fraction of a second, her mask cracked, panic flickering across her perfect features, before she stitched on a bright, brittle smile. "Claire," she sang, weaving through the crowd like a queen descending from her throne. "I didn't know you were coming." I smiled, small, calm. "I wasn't sure either," I said simply. The words fell between us, sharp and unsinkable. Nathan appeared at her side, his expression unreadable. But I saw it, the subtle stiffness in his shoulders, the way he angled slightly away from her, as if even standing beside her left a bad taste in his mouth. "Well," Madeline chirped, looping her arm through his, "you're just in time for the speeches." I nodded, letting her pull me along toward the dais at the front of the room. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Some faces wore open curiosity. Others wore the brittle, gleaming smiles of people sensing blood in the water. Madeline took the microphone, glittering under the chandelier like a moth, mistaking danger for light. "We're just so thrilled," she gushed, voice slightly too loud, "to be celebrating one wonderful, magical year." Polite applause. Nathan's face remained a marble wall. "And of course," Madeline continued, flashing me a too bright smile, "I couldn't have done it without my amazing husband, my beautiful family, and all of you." She raised her glass high. The room obediently lifted theirs. "And my sister Claire," she added sweetly, "who taught me everything I needed to know about perseverance." The sting was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained ear. But I heard it. I felt it settle into the hollow spaces between my ribs, and I decided, no more. Before the crowd could toast, I stepped forward. Madeline blinked, confused, her arm frozen midair. "May I?" I asked, my voice steady, extending a hand for the microphone. Madeline hesitated. For a moment, pure fear flickered in her eyes. But she was trapped by her own performance. With a brittle laugh, she handed it over. "Of course, darling," she said, voice brittle as spun sugar. I turned to the crowd, feeling the weight of 100 eyes. I took a breath, and I spoke. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight," I began. My voice carried, not loud, but clear, slicing through the velvet air. "I left this town because I thought disappearing was easier than confronting the truth." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. "But the truth has a way of following you," I said softly. "Of sitting on your chest while you sleep. Of burning holes in your dreams." I glanced at Madeline. She smiled. Tight. Desperate. Nathan didn't move. I continued. I want you all to know something about my sister, I said, my tone gentle. About the woman you've celebrated, toasted, worshipped. Madeline stiffened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. 1 year ago, at this very estate, while you all danced and drank and toasted true love, Madeline was slipping away to meet someone who wasn't her husband. Gasps, chairs scraping. Madeline's smile shattered. I pulled the envelope from my bag, the photos, and placed it on the table at the front of the room. I could have sent these anonymously, I said. I could have mailed them, whispered them, weaponized them. I looked Madeline dead in the eyes. But I'm not you. I turned to Nathan, and you deserve better than silence. Nathan reached for the envelope with steady hands. He flipped it open. The color drained from his face, but there was no rage there. Only a grim, heavy sadness, the kind that comes when a wound is finally, blessedly lanced open. Nathan stepped forward, his voice cutting the room into pieces. I filed for annulment 3 months ago, he said, voice cold. Irreconcilable differences. Another murmur, another ripple. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause a scene, Nathan continued, his gaze never leaving Madeline's. But maybe it's time someone did. Madeline opened her mouth. No words came out. For the first time in her life, the room wasn't hers. The crowd turned. Not with anger. Worse, with cold detachment. The way you turn from a performance that's lost its shine. The way you turn from something already dead. I didn't stay to watch the unraveling. I handed the microphone back to the stunned MC, nodded once at Nathan, and walked out into the night. No applause, no cheers, just the quiet satisfaction of a door finally closing behind me. The ocean air hit me like a benediction. Cool, clean, salt-sharp. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. At dawn, I stood at the edge of the cliffs, the wind whipping my hair across my face. In my hands, a small bundle of photographs, old snapshots, old lives. Madeline and me as children, sticky-fingered and grinning. Madeline at prom, shimmering in a borrowed dress I had hemmed at midnight. Madeline at graduation, clutching my hand so tightly it turned blue. Proof that love had existed. Proof that sometimes love wasn't enough. One by one, I let the photos slip from my fingers, the wind carrying them out over the heaving sea. Not in anger, not in mourning, but in freedom. I touched the locket at my throat, warm from my skin, no longer broken. I smiled, small, real, unbreakable, and I turned toward the rising sun.